How did Formula One, launched in 1950, become the world's premier motorsport? Who turned a collection of Grand Prix into a global business and a digital media machine? Why did a sport built on risk later bet on safety, cost caps, and sustainability? How did F1 go from a closed elite world to Netflix, 3 races in the United States, and a 24-round season? And why is it now no longer just a battle between drivers, but also a struggle over money, power, technology, and a global audience? In 2026, the champion runs across 24 races in 21 countries on 5 continents. Cadillac joins the grid as the 11th team, and by the end of 2025, Formula One's revenue had risen to $3.9 billion. Track attendance had reached 6.75 million. The season's cumulative audience totaled 1.83 billion, and the global fan base stood at approximately 826.5 million people. Formula One was born in 1950 not as a flawlessly assembled commercial machine, but as an FIA World Championship that brought the most prestigious Grand Prix together into a single competition. The first round of the new World Championship took place at Silverstone on May 13, 1950. In that era, F1 was above all the pinnacle of motorsport as an idea. Speed, national prestige, engineering audacity, factory ambition, and the cult of the driver. It was already a great sport, but not yet a unified media system capable of selling itself with equal force to broadcasters, promoters, and the global market. That is why the main turning point in Formula One's history came not at the moment of its birth, but later, when a man appeared in the paddock who understood a simple fact. In a sport like this, real power belongs not to the car and not even to the championship title, but to the person who controls the overall packaging of the show, the television signal, and the commercial rights. That man was Bernie Ecclestone. Ecclestone did not invent the races themselves, but he was the one who helped transform Formula One from a scattered set of prestigious rounds into a centralized commercial empire. His key move was that commerce and broadcasting stopped being an accessory to the sport and became its heart. Reuters noted directly that in 2001, the FIA signed a 100-year deal for the championship's commercial rights into Ecclestone's structure, separating commercial activity from regulation. At that moment, F1 finally began to live not only by the logic of starts and finishes, but by the logic of rights, contracts, broadcast signals, and global monetization. That was his real strength. Ecclestone was not simply building a business around racing, but a system in which everything was pulled toward the center. Promoter fees, TV contracts, VIP hospitality, negotiations with circuits, and the very idea that Formula One was a single global product rather than a set of separate events. He understood earlier that anyone else, that the person who packages the television image into one bundle and sells it to the world, in effect controls the entire sport. That is how F1 was transformed from an elite championship into an architecture of money. It has to be said, Ecclestone's model worked almost flawlessly for a long time. In 2012, deals involving stakes in the company valued the business at no less than $7.6 billion. And Reuters wrote at the same time that Formula One made money from promoters, television, sponsorship, and hospitality, remaining one of the most expensive sports assets in the world. When Liberty Media closed the deal in January 2017, it was already a business with an enterprise value of around $8 billion. That was the peak of the old F1, expansive, tightly monetized, global, and built almost entirely around commercial rights. But hidden within that very completeness was a future weakness. Late-stage Formula One under Ecclestone remained rich and influential, but it was increasingly out of touch with the digital era. While sports and media were moving into social platforms, streaming services, short-form content, and a constant battle for attention, F1 still lived by the logic of scarcity, control, and the old television vertical. A symbol of this mindset was Ecclestone's own words in 2014. He effectively said that Formula One did not especially need to chase younger audiences who do not buy expensive watches and live more through social media. In other words, the man who had once brilliantly packaged the sport for television later began to lose to a new culture of consumption. That meant his own system had begun to cut into its own growth. It was excellent at extracting money from status and exclusivity, but less capable of understanding that in the digital world, some value first has to be given away through access, openness, content, and engagement in order to collect even more later. Ecclestone's Formula One was not collapsing, it was aging. And that is why by the mid-2010s, it looked not like a weak sport, but like a very strong one that had become too rigid and no longer fully modern as a media asset. When Liberty Media completed its purchase of Formula One on January 23, 2017, it acquired not ruins and not the romantic chaos of motorsport, but a powerful, expansive, yet partially outdated global product. In official materials and Reuters reporting, the new era was presented from the very beginning as the end of Ecclestone's 40-year rule and the beginning of a more open, more media-driven, and more modern growth model. The new owners didn't try to break the engine of the old F1. They decided to reprogram the shell, the distribution, and the relationship with the audience. The symbolic break with the previous era began almost immediately. As early as February 2017, Reuters reported that the new owners had relaxed restrictions on teams and drivers using social media directly from the paddock. This was not a cosmetic gesture, but an important signal. Formula One no longer wanted to be a closed product whose access had to be rationed. It decided to learn how to exist in the fans' everyday digital life, not only in an expensive Sunday television package. The next step was the launch of F1 TV in 2018, the championship's own streaming service. Formula One described it as its biggest investment in digital transformation, while Reuters called it a tool that gives viewers more control over how they watch. Onboard cameras, additional feeds, data, team radio, and the archive. In other words, Liberty began building not only more modern marketing, but also its own digital infrastructure for consuming the sport. The real breakthrough came when Formula One learned to sell not only racing, but drama. Drive to Survive did for F1 what the old television product could no longer do. It translated the sport from the language of technology and status into the language of characters, conflicts, storylines, and emotional attachment. According to Nielsen data cited by Reuters, 1 in 4 of 46,000 people surveyed across 37 countries said they became a Formula One fan after watching the series. A sport that people had often entered through family tradition, engineering interest, or a national hero, learned how to scale through storytelling. The effect was not cosmetic but structural. According to the same Reuters and Nielsen data, F1's global fan base grew to 826.5 million people, with China up to 39%, the United States up to 10.5%, and Canada up to 31.5%. Formula One stopped growing only through its traditional European centers and learned how to scale in places where it had previously looked more like an expensive curiosity. The American market became especially important. 3 races in the United States were locked into the calendar, and the championship began operating not only as an international sport, but as a global entertainment brand with a strong American showcase. The money confirmed that this was no illusion. Liberty Media reported that by the end of 2025, Formula One's revenue had grown 14% to $3.9 billion. Operating income had risen to $632 million, adjusted OIBDA to $946 million, and track attendance had reached 6.75 million people. Reuters, citing Nielsen, added that the total audience for the 2025 season reached 1.83 billion. The average audience per Grand Prix was 76.1 million. Live race viewership rose by nearly 20%, and OTT viewing share nearly doubled over 5 years. This is no longer the economy of a sports niche. It is a global media business selling the right to host a race, to broadcast, branded presence, digital access, and a continuous stream of attention around every race weekend. But modern Formula One changed not only as a show. For too long, the sport sold the audience not only speed, but the feeling that drivers raced on the edge of human possibility and sometimes beyond it. After Imola 1994 and Karl Windlinger series accident in Monaco, the pace of safety changes accelerated sharply. An official Formula One feature says directly that this was the point when the development of car and driver protection began moving noticeably faster. F1 did not give up speed, but it gradually stopped making death parts of its aesthetic. The financial philosophy of the sport changed almost as radically. FIA financial regulations have been in force since 2021, and the separate cost cap administration was given the authority to monitor compliance, conduct audits, launch investigations, and apply measures in the event of breaches. This is not secondary accounting, but one of the most important shifts in the history of F1. The championship acknowledged that an endless spending war no longer strengthened it, but undermined it. Modern Formula One is no longer just a war among drivers and engineers, but also a world of auditors, lawyers, and compliance. The new 2026 cycle shows that this restructuring also affects the car themselves. Official explanations of the regulations speak directly of a shift in philosophy. Around half of the power now comes from the electrical side, and around half from the internal combustion engine running on advanced sustainable fuels. In other words, Formula One still sells sound, speed, and visual insanity, but under the bodywork, it is increasingly arguing about what the future of technology should look like if it is to appear at once as engineering progress and spectacle. Modern F1 does not run on hype alone, but also on a new institutional structure. In March 2025, all teams signed a new commercial Concord agreement intended to secure the championship's economic stability through 2030. In December, the governance block was signed as well, together with the FIA and all 11 teams. This is an important sign of maturity. Formula One has become too big to live only on the force of its brand, the charisma of team bosses, and the memory of old legends. It needs a complex, contractual system that distributes money, power, and rules in advance among the holder of the commercial rights, the federation, and the teams. That is why today's championship is the result of several different revolutions at once. First, Formula One was a dangerous elite sport, not yet assembled into a single corporate machine. Then Ecclestone turned it into an empire built on rights, broadcasts, and expansive global status. Then that empire reached its peak and began to age because of its own inflexibility. After that, Liberty Media did not destroy the old F1, but amplified it. It opened up social media, launched digital platforms, turned the championship into serialized content, expanded the US market, broadened the fan base, and scaled even more powerfully what Bernie had once assembled by hand. In 2026, the calendar includes 24 races in 21 countries on 5 continents, and Cadillac arrives as the 11th team. And that is a good symbol of the new era. Formula One remains an expansive closed club, but it has long since learned how to operate as a mass media machine. If you trace this whole story as one line, it turns out that Formula One became great not because it always knew where it was going. On the contrary, it radically changed the formula of its own survival several times. First, it sold risk, then exclusivity and control, then drama, digital reach, and mass attention. Now it also sells sustainability, regulation, economic discipline, and an image of the technological future. That is why today's F1 is no longer just a sport about who can drive a lap the fastest. It is the story of how speed was turned into one of the most powerful machines of money, power, and attention in world sport.